In an impeccable house in a luxurious neighborhood, a girl is a silent victim of a cruel stepmother. One day her body is tied in the backyard, exposed to a wasp nest as an unimaginable punishment. But when all seemed lost, a discredited police officer and his sensitive dog arrive at the scene by pure instinct. What happens next not only shocks the entire neighborhood, but changes the fate of that child forever. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The morning sun filtered through. The tall windows of the Montgomery estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, casting long shadows across the immaculate marble floors. 8-year-old Emily Montgomery pressed her small face against the cool glass of her bedroom window, watching as her father's black sedan disappeared down the tree-lined driveway. He was leaving again. Another business trip to Singapore, or was it London this time? She could never keep track anymore. Behind her she heard the clicking of heels on the hardwood floor. Sharp, deliberate, like a clock counting down. Emily's stomach tightened. She knew that sound. It meant her stepmother, Victoria, was coming. Victoria swept into the room without knocking. Her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of displeasure. She wore white, always white, as if trying to project an image of purity that Emily had long ago stopped believing in. "Your father has left for the airport," Victoria announced, her voice cool and measured, "which means we'll be following the house rules to the letter while he's gone. No exceptions." Emily nodded silently, her fingers twisting the hem of her cotton pajamas. She had learned that speaking too soon or too much only made things worse. "Your brother had an accident last night," Victoria continued, her pale blue eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made the girl want to shrink into herself. "He wet his bed again. Such behavior is unacceptable for a 7-year-old boy. He's scared of the dark," Emily whispered, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left her mouth. Victoria's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Scared. Children need to learn discipline, Emily. Fear teaches lessons that coddling never can. Your mother would have understood that." Emily felt her chest constrict at the mention of her mother. Her real mother, who had passed away when she was 4, leaving behind only fragments of warmth in Emily's memory. The scent of vanilla, the sound of laughter, the feeling of being truly safe. Everything Victoria was not. "Now get dressed," Victoria commanded. "Breakfast is in 20 minutes. If you're late, you won't eat." The woman left as abruptly as she had entered, leaving Emily alone in her room. The girl walked slowly to her closet, her mind already churning. She had tried talking to her father before, 3 times in the past month, actually. Each time he had brushed her off with distracted reassurances. "Victoria is strict, but she means well," he would say, barely looking up from his phone. "Children need structure, sweetheart. I trust her judgment." But Emily knew there was a difference between structure and cruelty. She had seen how Victoria's eyes changed when their father wasn't around, how her voice dropped to a threatening whisper when she disciplined them, how she seemed to take pleasure in their discomfort. As Emily pulled on her school uniform, she made a decision. If her father wouldn't listen to her words, maybe he would listen to Victoria's own words. She remembered seeing an old recording device in her father's study, tucked away in the back of a drawer. It was one of those small digital recorders he used to use for business meetings before everything moved to his phone and laptop. That afternoon, after school, Emily slipped into the study while Victoria was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Her heart hammered in her chest as she quietly opened the drawer, moving aside pens and old business cards, until her fingers closed around the cold metal of the recorder. It was smaller than, she remembered, fitting easily into the palm of her hand. She pressed the power button and felt a small thrill when the tiny screen lit up. It still worked. She tucked it into her backpack just as she heard Victoria's heels clicking down the hallway. Emily barely made it out of the study before her stepmother rounded the corner, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of milk and a plate of vegetables. "There you are," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. "Were you in your father's study?" "I was looking for a pen," Emily lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "For my homework." Victoria studied her for a long moment, and Emily was sure the woman could hear the pounding of her heart. But then Victoria simply nodded. "In the future, ask me first. Now, take this to your brother. He's in his room." Emily took the tray with trembling hands and walked quickly down the hall to her brother's room. 7-year-old Noah was sitting on his bed, his eyes red-rimmed and his small body hunched over. When he saw Emily, he tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Bug," Emily said softly, using the nickname their mother had given him. "I brought you a snack." Noah took the glass of milk but didn't drink. "Is Dad really gone again?" "Yeah," Emily admitted, setting the tray on his desk. "But only for a week this time." "A week is long," Noah whispered. His lower lip trembled. "Emily, I don't like it when it's just us and her." Emily sat beside him on the bed and wrapped her arm around his thin shoulders. "I know, but I'm working on something. I'm going to help us, okay? I promise." She didn't tell him about the recorder. She didn't want to give him hope until she knew it would work. But from that day forward, Emily kept the device hidden in her pocket, always within reach. She began recording conversations when Victoria thought they were alone. Snippets of harsh words, threats delivered in that cold, measured tone. One evening, 3 days after her father had left, Emily was setting the table for dinner when she heard Victoria's voice rise from the kitchen. She quickly reached into her pocket and pressed the record button, then crept closer to the doorway. "Noah, come here this instant," Victoria was saying, her voice sharp as broken glass. Emily peeked around the corner and saw her brother standing in the middle of the kitchen, his hands clasped in front of him. He had knocked over a glass of water, and the liquid was spreading across the white marble countertop. "It was an accident," Noah said, his voice small and frightened. "I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't good enough," Victoria hissed. She moved closer to him, and even from her hiding spot, Emily could see the way her brother flinched. "You need to learn, Noah. You need to learn what happens when you're careless. Fear is a wonderful teacher. Perhaps you need a lesson you won't forget." Emily's hand tightened around the recorder. This was it. This was the proof she needed. But she kept recording, waiting to see if Victoria would say more. "If you continue to disappoint me," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "I will make sure you understand the consequences. Do you know what happens to children who don't learn? They suffer, and sometimes suffering is the only way to make a lesson stick." Emily's blood ran cold. She had heard Victoria threaten before, but this was different. This was darker, more specific. She pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing, as Victoria made Noah clean up the spill and then sent him to his room without dinner. That night, Emily lay in bed and listened to the recording over and over through the tiny earbuds she had found in her father's desk. Victoria's words were clear, undeniable. This was what she needed to show her father. This was proof that something was deeply wrong. But Emily knew her father wouldn't be back for 4 more days, and 4 days suddenly felt like an eternity. The next morning, at school, Emily sat in her 3rd grade classroom, distracted and anxious. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman with graying hair and warm brown eyes, who always seemed to notice when something was wrong. When the other children went out for recess, Emily lingered behind, fidgeting with the recorder in her pocket. "Emily?" Mrs. Patterson looked up from her desk. "Is everything all right? You've seemed distracted today." This was her chance. Emily pulled out the recorder with shaking hands. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to show you something. It's about my stepmother. She says things to my brother and me when my dad isn't home. Bad things." The teacher's expression shifted to concern. She gestured for Emily to come closer. "What kind of things, sweetheart?" Emily played the recording, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Patterson's face, watching for the moment of recognition, the flash of alarm that would mean someone finally believed her. But as the recording played, Emily's heart began to sink. The audio was muddy, distorted. Victoria's words were there, but they were faint, buried under the sound of running water and the clatter of dishes. Without context, without seeing Victoria's face or hearing the full venom. In her tone, it just sounded like a stressed parent scolding a clumsy child. Mrs. Patterson frowned, leaning closer to the device. When the recording ended, she looked at Emily with sympathy. but Emily could see the doubt in her eyes. "Emily, I can hear that your stepmother was upset, but this recording is quite unclear. What exactly did she say that concerned you?" Emily tried to explain, tried to convey the menace she had heard, the threat that had been so clear in Victoria's voice, but the words tangled on her tongue, and she could see Mrs. Patterson's expression, shifting from concern to gentle skepticism. "I think you should talk to your father about this," Mrs. Patterson said finally, her voice kind but firm. "Sometimes when parents are stressed, they might sound harsher than they mean to be, but if you're feeling unsafe, your father needs to know." Emily wanted to scream, wanted to make Mrs. Patterson understand that her father didn't listen, that he was too busy, too distant, too willing to believe Victoria's perfect facade. But she just nodded and took back the recorder, feeling the familiar weight of helplessness settling over her shoulders. That afternoon, Victoria picked them up from school. She was all smiles and pleasantries with the other parents, waving cheerfully as Noah and Emily climbed into her pristine white SUV. But the moment they were alone on the road, her expression changed. "I received an interesting call from your teacher today, Emily," Victoria said, her eyes meeting Emily's in the rearview mirror. "She mentioned that you had some concerns you wanted to share with your father. Something about recordings." Emily's stomach dropped. Mrs. Patterson had called her. Of course she had. She probably thought she was being helpful, giving Victoria a heads up, so they could all talk as a family. "It was nothing," Emily said quickly, but her voice betrayed her fear. Victoria's smile was cold. "Oh, I think it was something. I think you've been telling tales, Emily, making up stories. Your father warned me you had an active imagination, but I didn't realize you were capable of such malicious behavior." "I didn't make anything up," Emily protested, but Victoria held up one perfectly manicured hand. "Enough. When we get home, you and I are going to have a serious conversation about respect and trust, and about what happens to little girls who lie." The rest of the drive passed in silence. Noah reached over and squeezed Emily's hand, and she squeezed back, trying to reassure him even as her own fear mounted. Victoria had always been careful. She had never left marks, never done anything that would show. But Emily knew that her stepmother was capable of cruelty in ways that didn't leave physical scars. When they arrived home, Victoria sent Noah to his room and told Emily to wait in the living room. The girl sat on the edge of the white sofa, the recorder still in her pocket, feeling like it was burning through the fabric. She had tried to help. She had tried to get proof, but she had only made things worse. Victoria returned with a glass of water and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Drink this. You must be thirsty after such an emotional day." Emily took the glass with trembling hands, but she didn't drink. Something in Victoria's expression made alarm bells ring in her mind. The woman stood there, watching her, waiting. "Why did you try to turn your teacher against me, Emily?" Victoria asked, her voice deceptively soft. "Don't you understand that I'm only trying to help you and your brother become better people? Your mother, God rest her soul, would be disappointed in how you've been behaving." "Don't talk about my mother," Emily said, her voice breaking. "You're nothing like her." Victoria's expression hardened. "No, I'm not. I'm stronger. I'm the one who's here, keeping this family together while your father chases his career around the world. And you will show me respect, Emily Montgomery, or you will learn the same lessons I've been trying to teach your brother." That night, Emily barely slept. She lay in bed, the recorder clutched to her chest, listening to every creak and footstep in the house. She had failed. No one believed her. And now Victoria knew she had tried to expose her. As the darkness pressed in around her, Emily made a decision. She would try again. She would find a way to make someone listen, because if she didn't, she feared what Victoria might do next. But Emily didn't know that time was running out faster than she could have imagined, and that the person who would finally hear her cries for help would come from a direction she never expected. Officer Marcus Reed sat in his patrol car on Maple Avenue, the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the relentless Connecticut heat. Beside him, in the specially modified passenger area, his K9 partner Duke rested his large German Shepherd head on his paws, panting softly. The dog's brown eyes tracked every movement on the quiet street with an intensity that had become both Duke's greatest asset and, according to the department, his most significant flaw. Marcus reached back and scratched Duke behind the ears. "Another quiet day in paradise, buddy." Duke whined softly, a sound that Marcus had learned to interpret over their 2 years together. The dog was restless. He had been restless for days now, especially when they patrolled this particular neighborhood. Greenwich's Riverside district was one of those places where nothing ever happened, where the homes were large and well-maintained, where families paid premium prices for safety and privacy. It was the last place Marcus expected to find trouble. But Duke seemed to disagree. 3 days ago, during a routine patrol past the Montgomery estate, Duke had suddenly pulled against his lead, straining toward the property with an urgency Marcus had rarely seen. The dog had stood at the edge of the manicured lawn, his body rigid, his nose working the air. Marcus had checked for obvious signs of trouble but found nothing. The house looked perfect, as always, so he had chalked it up to a rabbit or a cat that had caught Duke's attention and moved on. But Duke's behavior had continued. Yesterday, the dog had practically dragged Marcus to the property's front gate, refusing to move for nearly 5 minutes. Marcus's supervisor, Lieutenant Hayes, had witnessed the incident and had not been impressed. "Reed, that dog is becoming a liability," Hayes had said, his weathered face creased with disapproval. "A K-9 officer needs to follow commands, not chase ghosts." Duke's empathy training was supposed to make him better at detecting human distress, not turn him into an anxious mess. If he can't perform his duties, we'll have to consider reassignment. Marcus had wanted to argue that Duke's instincts had been right more often than they had been wrong, that the dog's unusual sensitivity to human emotion had helped them de-escalate potentially dangerous situations. But he had learned that defending Duke only made things worse. The department had already labeled his partner as too soft, too emotionally reactive. One more strike, and Duke would be retired from service at only 4 years old. Now, as they sat in the patrol car, Duke suddenly sat up, his ears pricked forward. The dog began to whine, a low, persistent sound that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, watching as Duke's attention fixed on something down the street. Before Marcus could react, the radio crackled to life. "All units in the Riverside area, we have a report of a possible wellness check needed at 2847 Maple Avenue. Anonymous caller reported unusual sounds coming from the property, a buzzing noise and what might be a child in distress. Low priority, but someone should take a look." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. That address was the Montgomery estate, the same house Duke had been fixated on for days. He grabbed the radio. "Unit 7 responding. We're 2 minutes out." As Marcus started the engine, Duke began barking urgently, pawing at the partition that separated them. The dog's behavior sent a chill down Marcus's spine. In 2 years of partnership, he had never seen Duke this agitated. They arrived at the estate to find the front gate standing open, which immediately struck Marcus as odd. The wealthy residents of this neighborhood were meticulous about security. He pulled the patrol car into the circular driveway and got out, opening the partition to let Duke out on his lead. The dog immediately pulled toward the house, not the front door, but around the side, toward the backyard. Marcus followed, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. "Unit 7, we're on scene at the Montgomery residence investigating the backyard area." As they rounded the corner of the house, Marcus heard it, a buzzing sound, angry and loud like a swarm of hornets or wasps, and underneath that sound, something else. A child's cry, weak and terrified. Duke broke into a run, yanking the lead from Marcus's hand, and Marcus sprinted after him. What he saw when he reached the backyard would haunt him for the rest of his life. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, was tied to a wooden post near the back fence. His small body was covered in welts, his face swollen and streaked with tears. Around him a dark cloud of wasps swarmed, their angry buzzing filling the air. The child was barely conscious, his head lolling forward, but what made Marcus's blood run cold was the woman standing 15 feet away, dressed in a full beekeeper's suit, holding a long aluminum rod. She was deliberately prodding a large wasp nest attached to the fence, keeping the insects agitated and focused on the helpless child. "Police! Step away from the child!" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with a combination of rage and horror. The woman turned, and through the protective netting of her suit, Marcus could see her pale eyes, cold and calculating. "This doesn't concern you, officer. This is a private family matter. The child is learning a necessary lesson." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A lesson? You're torturing a child." Duke didn't wait for commands. The dog launched himself toward the boy, his powerful body moving with a speed and purpose that Marcus had never seen before. Instead of attacking the woman, which the dog had been trained to do in threatening situations, Duke threw himself over the child's body, covering as much of the small form as he could with his own. The wasps, already agitated, turned their fury on the dog. Marcus watched in horror as Duke's body jerked with each sting, but the dog didn't move, didn't abandon his position protecting the child. Marcus's training kicked in. He ran to the side of the yard where he had spotted an old garden sprayer attached to a hose. He grabbed it, turned the water on full blast, and began spraying the swarm, the force of the water dispersing the insects. It wasn't enough to drive them away completely, but it gave him a window. He dropped the sprayer and ran to the post, pulling a knife from his belt. The woman in the beekeeper suit moved toward him, shouting something, but Marcus ignored her. He cut through the ropes binding the boy, catching the child as he slumped forward. Duke, still covering the boy's upper body, whimpered, but held his position. "It's okay, buddy," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "I've got him. Come on." He scooped up the boy in one arm, the other hand grabbing Duke's collar, and ran toward the patrol car. Behind him, he could hear the woman screaming about overreach and invasion of privacy, her voice shrill with indignation rather than concern. Marcus laid the boy gently in the back of the patrol car and then helped Duke up beside him. The dog's coat was covered in welts, his eyes glazed with pain, but he immediately nuzzled the boy's face, as if checking to make sure he was still breathing. Marcus grabbed his radio with trembling hands. "Dispatch, I need emergency medical immediately at 2847 Maple Avenue. We have a child in critical condition from multiple wasp stings, possible anaphylaxis. Also need backup and animal emergency services. My canine partner is injured." He pulled an EpiPen from his emergency kit, something every officer carried after a training session on allergic reactions. The boy's breathing was labored, his lips turning blue. Marcus administered the injection, praying it wasn't too late, then grabbed another and hesitated only a moment before using it on Duke. The dog was in bad shape, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Hold on," Marcus whispered to both of them. "Just hold on." The sound of sirens filled the air within minutes. EMTs arrived first, immediately taking over care of the boy. Duke was loaded into an animal ambulance, and Marcus felt his heart break as they took his partner away. But he couldn't go with Duke. He had a job to finish. He turned to find the woman, Victoria Montgomery, standing in her driveway. She had removed the beekeeper suit and was now dressed in an immaculate white dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was ready for a country club luncheon, not like she had just deliberately endangered a child's life. "You've made a terrible mistake, officer," Victoria said, her voice icy with controlled fury. "That is my stepson. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit. You have no authority to interfere with how I raise my children." Marcus stared at her, genuinely shocked by her audacity. "Discipline? You tied a 7-year-old child to a post and deliberately exposed him to a wasp attack. That's not discipline. That's assault, child endangerment, and possibly attempted manslaughter." Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "You're overreacting. The child needed to learn respect. He needed to understand consequences. His father put me in charge of his upbringing." "Then his father made a grave error in judgment," Marcus said, his voice hard. He turned to his backup officers who had just arrived. "Arrest her. Full charges." As the officers moved to handcuff Victoria, Emily Montgomery came running from the house, her small face streaked with tears. "My brother! Where's Noah? Is he okay?" Marcus knelt down to her level. "He's on his way to the hospital, honey. The doctors are going to take care of him. Emily's eyes were wild with fear and guilt. I tried to tell people. I tried to get help, but nobody believed me. I have recordings, but they weren't good enough. And then she knew I was trying, and I made it worse. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. This little girl had been trying to save her brother, and the adults in her life had failed her. You didn't make anything worse, Emily. You were incredibly brave, and you kept trying, even when people didn't listen. That takes real courage. But is Noah going to be okay? Emily asked, her voice breaking. And your dog? Duke? Is he going to survive? I don't know, Marcus admitted, because he couldn't lie to her. She deserved honesty. But they're both fighters, and they're getting the best care possible. At the hospital, Marcus paced the waiting room, his uniform still, damp with sweat and garden hose water. A doctor finally emerged, her expression grave but not hopeless. The boy, Noah Montgomery, is stable, she said. The EpiPen you administered saved his life. He went into anaphylactic shock from the venom, but we were able to treat him in time. He'll need to stay here for observation, but he's going to recover fully. Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. And my dog, Duke? The veterinarian who had been working on Duke came out a moment later. He received over 100 stings, concentrated mostly on his back and shoulders, where he was protecting the child. He's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Duke had saved that boy's life by using his own body as a shield. The same empathy that the department had viewed as a weakness had given Duke the instinct to protect rather than attack. Robert Montgomery arrived at the hospital 3 hours later, having caught the first flight back from London. Marcus watched as the man rushed through the emergency room doors, his expensive suit rumpled, his face drawn with panic and guilt. Emily was sitting in the waiting room, a police advocate beside her, when her father found her. She looked up at him, and Marcus saw a complex mixture of emotions cross her young face. Relief, anger, hurt, hope. "Emmy," Robert Montgomery said, his voice cracking. He fell to his knees in front of his daughter. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Emily's lower lip trembled. "You didn't believe me, Daddy. I tried to tell you about Victoria, but you were always too busy. You said I was making things up." The man's face crumpled. "I know, and I will never forgive myself for that. I was so focused on my work, so eager to believe that everything at home was fine, that I ignored the most important thing in the world, you and Noah. Can you ever forgive me?" Emily didn't answer right away. She looked at her father for a long moment, and Marcus could see the battle playing out behind her eyes, the need for her father's love warring with the pain of his absence and neglect. Finally, she said, "I want you to be different. I want you to really be here, not just in the house, but really here, with us." "I will," Robert promised, and Marcus could hear the sincerity in his voice. "I swear to you, Emily, everything is going to change, starting right now." Over the next few days, as Noah recovered in his hospital bed and Duke fought for his life in the veterinary ICU, the full scope of Victoria Montgomery's actions came to light. Police found Emily's recordings, which, when enhanced by forensic audio specialists, clearly captured Victoria's threats and cold manipulation. Medical examinations revealed old bruises on both children, carefully, placed where they wouldn't show in normal clothing. A psychological evaluation painted a picture of a woman with severe control issues and a complete lack of empathy for the children in her care. Victoria was formally charged with child endangerment, assault, and reckless endangerment. The prosecutor pushed for the maximum sentence and the judge agreed. She would spend the next 28 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Duke survived. It took 3 weeks of intensive treatment, but the German Shepherd's strong constitution and fierce will to live pulled him through. When Marcus finally got to bring him home, the department's attitude toward the dog had completely changed. Duke was no longer seen as too soft or too empathetic. He was a hero. The department organized a ceremony to honor Duke, and the entire community showed up. Emily and Noah were there, along with their father, who had taken an extended leave from work to focus on rebuilding his relationship with his children. Emily gave a short speech, her voice steady despite her young age, about how Duke had saved her brother's life by doing something that came naturally to him, caring. Marcus watched as Emily approached Duke. After the ceremony, kneeling down to wrap her arms around the dog's neck, Duke, still healing but much stronger, leaned into her embrace and licked her cheek gently. "Thank you for protecting my brother," Emily whispered into Duke's fur. "You're the bravest dog in the whole world." Robert Montgomery approached Marcus, his hand extended. "Officer Reed, I can never thank you enough for what you did. You saved both my children in different ways." Marcus shook his hand. "Duke deserves most of the credit. He knew something was wrong long before I did. I should have trusted his instincts sooner." "Perhaps," Robert said, his voice heavy with emotion, "but you listened when it mattered more than I can say for myself." In the weeks that followed, Robert Montgomery made good on his promise to change. He cut back his international travel, delegating responsibilities and prioritizing his time at home. He enrolled both children in therapy to help them process their trauma. And most importantly, he showed up, to school events, to dinner, to the quiet moments when his children needed him most. Emily and Noah's recovery was not linear. There were setbacks, nightmares, moments of fear when the memories became too vivid. But Robert was there, patient and present, learning to be the father his children needed. Duke became a regular visitor to the Montgomery household. Marcus would bring him by once a week, and the dog would spend time with Noah, who had developed a special bond with his four-legged protector. The boy's therapist noted that Duke's presence seemed to accelerate Noah's healing, providing a sense of safety that words alone couldn't offer. As for Emily, she started to smile again. Slowly at first, then more freely, she returned to school, made friends, and rediscovered the joy of just being a child. But she also carried something new, a strength born from surviving something terrible and coming out the other side. She had tried to save her brother, and while she hadn't succeeded alone, she had never given up. That persistence, that refusal to accept injustice even when adults wouldn't listen, stayed with her. 6 months after the incident, the community organized a fundraiser to support programs for child protection and canine training. Marcus and Duke were asked to speak, sharing their story and emphasizing the importance of trusting instincts, both canine and human, when something feels wrong. Emily stood on the stage with them, no longer the frightened little girl who had tried desperately to be heard. She told the audience about the importance of believing children, of listening even when the story seems impossible, of trusting that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. "My brother is okay because Officer Reed and Duke didn't give up," Emily said, her voice clear and strong. "They showed up when we needed them most. And Duke didn't protect my brother because he was trained to attack bad guys. He protected Noah because he cared, because he felt our fear and our pain and decided to do something about it. That's what real heroes do." The audience erupted in applause, and Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. Duke, sitting beside him in his official canine vest, tail wagging, seemed to understand the significance of the moment. After the event, as the crowd began to disperse, Noah ran up to Duke and threw his small arms around the dog's neck. "I love you, Duke," the boy said simply. Duke's tail wagged harder, and he gently licked Noah's face, making the boy giggle. It was a sound of pure joy, free from fear, and it was one of the most beautiful things Marcus had ever heard. Robert Montgomery stood nearby, his arm around Emily's shoulders, watching his son play with the dog who had saved his life. "I almost lost them," he said quietly to Marcus. "I was so focused on building a successful career that I nearly lost the only things that truly mattered." "But you didn't lose them," Marcus reminded him. "You're here now. That's what counts." As the sun set over Greenwich, casting long shadows across the park where the event had been held, Marcus watched his unusual family of survivors, a father learning to truly see his children, a boy rediscovering what it meant to feel safe, a girl who had found her voice and refused to let it be silenced, and a dog who had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from aggression, but from the courage to care deeply and act selflessly. Duke pressed against Marcus's leg, and Marcus reached down to scratch behind his partner's ears. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. "You did real good." The German shepherd looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, and Marcus could have sworn the dog understood every word. In the months and years that followed, the Montgomery family continued to heal. Robert never returned to his old pattern of absence and neglect. He became an advocate for work-life balance, speaking at business conferences about the cost of putting career before family. Emily grew into a confident young woman who would later become a child advocate, using her experience to help other children who felt unheard. Noah, though he carried scars both physical and emotional, learned to trust again, with Duke's gentle presence guiding him back to a sense of safety. And Duke. He continued to serve with Marcus, his empathy no longer seen as a flaw, but as his greatest asset. The department even started a new training program based on Duke's approach, teaching other K-9 units to trust their instincts about human distress. On quiet afternoons, Marcus would sometimes take Duke to visit the Montgomery home, where they would find Emily and Noah playing in the backyard, the same backyard that had once been a place of terror. But now it was filled with laughter, with the sound of children being children, protected and loved and free. And watching, over them, always vigilant, always caring, would be a German shepherd who had learned that true courage doesn't roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I will protect you, no matter the cost."